This is the story of a boy who destroyed someone's life when he was only a child, and years later, he hated himself so much that he could barely look another person in the eye. But this is also the story of the girl he hurt. A girl who kept apologizing for pain that was never her fault in the first place. 000230. Shoya Ishida begins as the kind of loud, restless kid who treats everything like entertainment. He gets bored easily. He acts before he thinks. And more than anything, he wants attention. Then a new student named Shoko Nishimiya joins the class. Shoko is deaf, and she tries to communicate politely with everyone around her, but from the very beginning, it is clear that fitting into this classroom is not going to be easy for her. At first, the class treats her difference like something curious. But that curiosity turns cruel very quickly. Shoya turns her hearing aids into a joke. He mocks the way she talks. He treats her discomfort like it is something funny. And because the rest of the class either laughs along or stays silent, the bullying starts to feel normal. 23530. Shoko keeps trying anyway. She smiles. She apologizes. She writes in her notebook because she still wants to connect with the people around her, but every attempt she makes seems to invite more humiliation. Shoya damages her hearing aids again and again, pushing her to the point where school becomes painful just to survive. What makes this opening so hard to watch is that the movie does not try to soften what Shoya did. It wants us to see how ordinary cruelty can become when nobody steps in. Eventually, the school can no longer ignore what is happening. Adults get involved. Questions are asked. And suddenly, the entire class turns on Shoya. 53830. The same kids who laughed while Shoko was being hurt now distance themselves from Shoya. They treat him like he is the only guilty person in the room. He becomes the scapegoat. He is blamed publicly, isolated, and left to carry the shame alone. But even though he is being punished now, that does not erase what he did before. This is the beginning of Shoya's collapse. He loses the easy confidence he used to have. And maybe for the first time, he understands what it feels like to be cut off from everyone around him. Years pass. But that guilt never really leaves him. 8301200. By the time Shoya is older, he is almost unrecognizable. He avoids people. He avoids eye contact. And whenever possible, he avoids conversation completely. In his mind, he sees X marks covering other people's faces because real connection feels unbearable to him. He has convinced himself that he does not deserve friendship. And maybe, deep down, he does not even believe he deserves to keep living. Before he goes through with that thought, Shoya decides there is one thing he has to do first. He wants to find Shoko Nishimiya and return the notebook she used to communicate with the class. More than that, he wants to apologize. Even if he knows he has no right to expect forgiveness. 12001500. When Shoya finally meets Shoko again, the reunion is awkward, painful, and strangely gentle. Shoko still remembers him. She still smiles. And even now, she is still apologizing more than she should. Shoya does not know how to respond to that kindness, because he believes he has no right to receive it. But this meeting changes something in him. For the first time in years, instead of running away from his past, he decides to face it. He wants to make amends. Even if the process is messy. Even if it is incomplete. Even if it hurts. 15001830. Shoya begins trying to reconnect with the people tied to that painful chapter of his life. One of the first is Tomohiro Nagatsuka, a classmate who attaches himself to Shoya after a small act of kindness. Nagatsuka is loud, strange, and honestly kind of adorable in his own way, but he becomes incredibly important because he is the first person in years who simply chooses Shoya without judgment. That friendship matters because it starts to crack the shell around Shoya. He is still uncomfortable, still ashamed, still carrying enormous guilt, but little by little he starts participating in life again, instead of just enduring it. 1830-2200. The story then starts bringing other people back into the picture. Yuzuru, Choko's younger sister, is openly suspicious of Shoya. And honestly, she has every reason to be. She has seen what Shoko suffered, and she is not interested in watching her sister get hurt again. Her hostility is one of the movie's clearest reminders that an apology does not automatically rebuild trust. Shoya also crosses paths with classmates from the past, including Naoki Ueno and Miki Kawai. Both of them reveal different ways people protect themselves from guilt. One is blunt and aggressive. The other hides behind performative innocence. And together, they show how unwilling people can be to confront the damage they helped create. 2200-2530. Shoko remains one of the most heartbreaking characters in the film because, even after everything, she still sees herself as a burden. She blames herself for making life difficult for others. She apologizes constantly. She tries to disappear inside politeness. And that is the tragedy. The world has taught her to carry guilt for pain she never caused. As Shoya spends more time with her, he begins to understand not only the harm he caused in the past, but also the depth of the loneliness she still lives with. Their relationship is not a simple romance. It is two damaged people trying, in very imperfect ways, to understand each other's suffering. 2530-2900. The group around them becomes larger, but not healthier. The old tensions never really go away, and what the movie understands so well is that people do not become good just because time passes. Old resentments remain. Old lies remain. And some wounds keep bleeding under the surface, even when everyone pretends to be moving on. Shoya wants a clean path toward redemption, but real life refuses to give him one. He cannot simply say sorry and be absolved. He has to keep living inside the consequences of what happened. 2900-3230. As the group spends more time together, their conflicts become impossible to ignore. Naoka's cruelty towards Shoko resurfaces. Kawai continues protecting her own image, and the emotional balance of the group begins to fall apart because everyone is carrying unresolved feelings. At the center of it all, Shoya is trying desperately to hold things together, but he still does not know how to heal something this broken. The movie is brilliant here because it refuses to present healing as neat or instantly inspiring. Reconnection often makes things worse before it makes them better. Pain that stayed buried starts coming back up. 3230-3600. Shoko's self-hatred becomes more visible as the pressure around her grows. Even when people are trying to be kind, she still believes she only causes suffering. And because she thinks that way, she starts making dangerous emotional decisions in silence. Meanwhile, Shoya is finally beginning to hope that life might still hold something for him. He wants to stay close to Shoko. He wants to become someone better. But the cruelest thing about this story is that just when hope begins to appear, fear and despair hit the hardest. 3600-3930. The turning point comes when Shoko reaches her lowest emotional state. She smiles on the surface, but inside, she is overwhelmed by loneliness and guilt. And Shoya realizes too late how much pain she has been hiding. When he sees what is happening, he reacts instantly. There is no hesitation. In one desperate moment, the boy who once caused Shoko so much suffering throws himself into danger to save her. And in doing so, he falls. 3930-4300. This moment is not powerful because it erases the past. It is powerful because it proves that Shoya has changed in the deepest possible way. He is no longer the careless child who treated someone else's pain like a game. He is willing to risk everything for another person, but the aftermath is devastating. Shoya is left unconscious. Shoko is consumed with guilt, believing once again that she ruins the lives of the people around her, and the people connected to them are shaken into finally confronting what they have avoided for years. 43004630. During Shoya's recovery, everyone is forced into a more honest emotional space. Yuzoru's anger gives way to grief and fear. Shoko has to face the reality that she wanted to disappear because she could no longer bear her own pain. And even characters who spent most of the story lying to themselves are pushed closer to the truth. The film slows down here in a very deliberate way. It gives us time to sit with what almost happened, and with everything these people are still failing to say to each other. 4630-4930. When Shoya wakes up, his reunion with Shoko becomes one of the most emotionally charged moments in the story. He is alive. She is alive. And for the first time, they begin to speak more honestly about what they mean to each other. There is still no magic fix. Shoya is not suddenly free of guilt. Shoko is not suddenly free of self-hatred. But they are both moving towards something they could not reach before. Genuine understanding. 4930-5200. The final stretch of the story is about re-entering the world. Shoya returns to school and public life, still carrying his scars, but no longer hiding from everyone around him. The X marks he used to imagine over people's faces begin to fall away. This is not the movie telling us he is cured. It is the movie telling us he is finally willing to be seen. And that is such an important distinction. Healing here is not a dramatic transformation into a perfect person. It is the quieter, harder decision to stay alive, stay present, and keep trying, even when you still feel broken. 5200-5309. By the end, a silent voice leaves us with something painful but hopeful. The past cannot be erased. Some damage lasts forever. Some apologies come late. And some wounds never disappear completely. But the film still believes people can change. It still believes connection can return. And it still believes that even after terrible mistakes, there is meaning in reaching for each other again. That is why this story stays with so many people. It is not just about bullying. It is about shame, forgiveness, loneliness, and the terrifying relief of being understood by another person. And in the end, it reminds us that sometimes the bravest thing anyone can do is simply choose to keep living. A silent voice is painful, honest, and deeply human, and maybe that is why, long after it ends, its quiet message still stays with us.